Study Hall this week comes to you from the beautiful flying city of Columbia, a perfect utopia where nothing could possibly go wrong, ever. Nope, not one thing. Greetings and salutations, and welcome once again to another episode of Max Scoville's Study Hall. This is the show where I take a video game, or perhaps a theme from a video game, and then reach out into the pop culture ether and pluck a fistful of recommendations that also incorporate that theme, or which I feel are somehow related. Think of it as like free association multimedia playlist curated by a guy who spends way too much time rooting around on Wikipedia. Anyway, today we're going to get a bit more nebulous than usual. Elysium hits theaters next week, and it stars Matt Damon as a cancer-riddled cyborg ex-con in the future who's trying to get from Earth, which is entirely a third-world police state, to Elysium, a utopian space colony paradise full of rich people with free healthcare and swimming pools and robot cabana boys. The name Elysium, of course, is taken from the good ending afterlife from Greek mythology, otherwise known as Elysian Fields, a place for a select few mortals, either relatives of the gods or those handpicked for the epic deeds they did while they were still alive. A similar idea to the halls of Valhalla from Norse mythology. In other words, it is a very exclusive version of heaven. Elysium's like a big VIP room in the sky for only the cool kids. Now, good science fiction often presents us with an exaggerated version of the world we live in. In the case of Elysium, it is a future where the middle class has effectively gone extinct, and the distribution of wealth is so lopsided that the richest 1% have actually abandoned the planet, leaving the other 99% to deal with earthling problems like overcrowding and population and, cancer. So basically, it's like Newt Gingrich's dreams come true. This kind of reimagining of social order is hardly a new one for science fiction, and bittersweet utopian societies have popped up in plenty of video games as well, so let's talk about video games. Most recently, we all went and explored the flying city of Columbia in Bioshock Infinite, which seemed like a great place to live, assuming that you're white and Christian and don't mind giant shrieking robot birds or nausea-inducing high-speed zipline being your primary mode of transportation. The original Bioshock, of course, had a pretty similar premise, except it was all underwater, and you could shoot bees out of your hands because video games? Anyway, some other games that focus on a heavenly utopia in the sky are the Dystopias series. Dystopias is more along the lines of Elysium than Bioshock, since the hero, Rufus, is a common ruffian dead set on escaping the garbage planet of Dystopias for the beautiful floating cities up in the sky. It's a point-and-click adventure that doesn't take itself too seriously, and it takes some cues from the humor of Douglas Adams and Matt Groening, which is always nice. And the third entry in the series, Goodbye Dystopias, is coming to Mac and PC this fall, so keep an eye on that one. If you ask me, living on a third-world garbage planet is infinitely preferable to being a slave in a meat-packing plant in an industrial factory city and then finding out the meat that you've been packing is made from your friends. And that's pretty much the premise of the first Oddworld game, which has since spawned numerous sequels and spin-offs. A bunch of these have recently been given HD remakes courtesy of Just Add Water, and while they're definitely on the weirder end of the spectrum, they certainly do fit the bill for dystopian fiction where the working class gets the short end of the stick. Fortunately, the original Oddworld is getting an HD re-release this winter under the new name Oddworld, New and Tasty, so, keep an eye out for that one too. Now let's branch out from games a bit. If we're talking about frightening dystopias with messed up class relations, then we pretty much have to talk about Brazil, the movie. Brazil follows a government worker who's living a rather tedious and fruitless life until he meets the girl of his dreams. Quite literally a girl he recognizes from a dream. However, she's also from the wrong side of the tracks, and due to a mix-up, she winds up on the run from the law due to being branded a terrorist due to a clerical error. Now, Brazil is arguably Terry Gilliam's most notable work, partially because it's a really good film, but also because the utterly staggering amount of bullshit it took for it to get released in its intended form. Upon completion, the studio cut large chunks out of Gilliam's film to give it a more consumer-friendly ending, and it was considered a flop at the box office. Thankfully, after winning numerous awards and amassing a huge cult following, the movie has since been re-released in its intended form, up to Gilliam's standards, so go track down the director's cut of Brazil. It's an absolute marvel in filmmaking, and I hate saying stuff like that, but it totally is. Anyway, moving from movies to books, I wouldn't be much of a pop culture historian if I didn't give a tip of the hat to old Mr. H.G. Wells' classic, The Time Machine. Now, obviously, The Time Machine is primarily about time travel, but Wells was also one of the first authors to tackle the idea of a drastic class divide in the distant future, in fact, to the point where the human race just evolved into two different species altogether. It suggested that the rich, pretty people in the Time Machine have turned into the Eloi, a bunch of surface-dwelling creatures that basically just sit around all day eating fruit and not worrying about anything in particular, and then the working class has become the subterranean Morlocks who provide food and clothing and infrastructure to the Eloi, but who also happen to come up and eat the surface-dwellers periodically. So it's sort of like that Motorhead song, Eat the Rich, except it's 800,000 years in the future and the entire working class actually looks like Lemmy Kilmister. There's a ton of overlap between cyberpunk fiction and dystopian fiction. If you're interested in reading into something that blends the two fairly well, I would recommend the short story Stone Lives by Paul DeFilippo. It's centered around a class divide with a blind homeless guy named Stone being the hero who gets pulled from his life of begging and scrounging into the upper echelons of futuristic high society, where he gets a brand new pair of fully functional cybernetic eyeballs. And as you might expect, that takes a bit of adjustment. You can find that in the cyberpunk anthology Mirror Shades, which is edited by Bruce Sterling, and I highly recommend picking up. It's a great read. Finally, a couple quick music recommendations. Now, I might be going out on a limb here, but I feel like Talking Heads is a fitting band to mention when discussing the juxtaposition of the bottom rungs of society with the upper crust. The 1980s is known for being a time of greed and decadence and increased commercialization, especially in the music industry, with a newfound emphasis on marketing and promotion of music acts, and the synthesizer and disco culture leading to less of a demand for actual live musicians in studios and in venues. And while all this was happening, Talking Heads, instead of selling out, were fusing punk and jazz and new wave and funk and world music influences and singing about more than just being a material girl or wearing your sunglasses at night. And they also took advantage of the popularity of MTV to experiment with the music video as an artistic medium, with lead singer David Byrne actually directing a number of their videos. If you've never heard them, go listen to the now classic songs Road to Nowhere off the album Little Creatures and Once in a Lifetime from the album Remain in Light. Road to Nowhere, which is possibly my favorite song ever, could easily be interpreted as a commentary on the human race's ruthless and often self-destructive progression through history and how we're all just kind of endlessly working towards some distant and possibly just metaphorical paradise, but the lyrics can definitely be read into in more ways than one. Once in a Lifetime, on the other hand, seems to be about waking up one day and realizing that you've suddenly got a car and a house and a wife and having no idea how that happened, sort of like a first world epiphany about how easy it is to take all that for granted. Again, that's just my interpretation. They're very poetic lyrics, but it's good food for thought. Anyway, we might not be in an orbital space colony resort or a city in the clouds, but I'm assuming that if you guys are watching me ramble on about science fiction and 80s bands on the internet, you're probably not living in abandoned subway tunnels or slaving away in meatpacking factories, and hopefully that helps keep things in perspective. Do you guys have any utopian, dystopian, or otherwise socially critical pop culture recommendations for me? You should leave them in the comments or holler at me on Twitter. I'm Max Scoville on there. I'm having a great time doing this show. I don't know, you guys seem like you like it. If that's the case, why not share it with your friends, please, for me, your old pal Max? Anyway, that's my cue. And tune in next week when I talk about superheroes and superpowers and a variety of ways that they've been reinterpreted super creatively. I will see you guys later. If you need me, I'll be over there eating hot dogs and pineapples out of the garbage while a teenage girl throws coins at my head.